Spirited Dialogue, hosted by Transformity. I'm Gautam Palapa,
I'm Asankar.
and this is episode 3 of the strategy series, Data Driven, leveraging data for a superior data experience with our guest Sunil Sharma. Sunil, thank you for joining us again. Looking forward to your insights.
Thank you, Asanka, and thank you, Gautam, once again for inviting me. It's been an exciting journey so far, and I'm looking forward to today's dialogue as well.
Awesome. Thank you. So in episode 1, we talked about what a good data strategy is and why it's valuable to an organization, especially in this hyper-dynamic, digital native experience economy that we live in. We then drill deeper in episode 2 and explore how to convince an organization that they need a good data strategy and how to build one. And so today, I would like us to explore how we can incorporate a good data strategy into our organization. So as I've mentioned before, data without a strategy is like a ship without a rudder. It will drift aimlessly and never reach its destination. Or in an organizational sense, it'll never achieve its business outcomes, but will continue to project that illusion of being on a journey. And so it's extremely dangerous. So this is why a data-driven culture is essential for modern organizations, because it helps them to make those informed decisions based on empirical evidence rather than just intuition or guesswork. And some of the benefits or the key reasons why this is so important is A, like I mentioned, it gives that better decision making. It improves the customer experience because when you're analyzing the customer data, the organizations can then get insights into their behavior, their preferences, and their needs. And this information can then be used to improve the customer experience that leads to increased loyalty and revenue and so on. It also provides greater agility because the organizations now become more agile and responsive to changing market condition, and they can monitor the key metrics and analyze trends. And this in turn drives increased innovation and stronger performance. And so there is so much benefit of having a data-driven culture, and that's why it's so essential for modern organizations. But what Asanka and I have observed is that there are some misconceptions around implementing a data-driven culture. And so we'd like to get your take on it, Sunil. And one of the most common misconceptions that we have seen, and I'd like to start us here, is that a data-driven culture means relying solely on data to make all decisions. Somehow, data is the only factor to consider when you're implementing a data-driven culture. And it seems to, or people think that it replaces intuition and good old-fashioned human judgment. So what are your thoughts about this, Sunil?
That's a great question, Gautam, and we often hear that the culture can eat your strategy for lunch or dinner or breakfast, whatever to call it. It is so true. And let's understand what culture really means. The culture is the creating an environment where to grow. So this is where the culture is. And coming on the data side of things, so data-driven culture means creating an environment where people or the organization is able to make more decisions based on that data, and it grows as we progress. So the data is a enabler. It's an enabler to make better decisions, but it's not a substitution for making the decisions. So at the end of the day, the decisions are made by the people. And along with the data, there are so many factors which are involved in making the decision, which data itself cannot. Data is just, we should take data as an enabler to make better decisions. That's one. Second is, let's think about, let's say if you're going from San Francisco to, let's say, LA, and you want to use a map. So you look at the map, you put the directions. So map is showing you where things are and how you can progress. But map itself is not driving you to the location. You still need to make the decisions, which route you want to take. You want to take a toll, you don't want to take a toll. You want to take PCH1, you want to take 5, what route you want to take. But it is giving you different options. and what decision you make, it will give you the outcome accordingly. So it's an enabler, not a substitute for decision making.
I love that example, and I'm probably going to date myself here, but I still remember in the olden days how we used to take printouts from MapQuest, especially when we used to map from one
Correct.
city to another. And we used to make decisions based on the way, like where we want to stop, where we want to go have lunch, where we want to do other things. And we never actually we used the data as enabler, as you said, Sunil, and also as a method of taking decisions, but it wasn't limited to just that. We always took into consideration other factors such as business strategy. If from an organizational standpoint, we have to take into consideration the customer feedback and employee input as well. A data-driven culture should complement all these other decision-making processes and not replace them. So thank you for explaining that, especially with that nostalgic visual of mapping. The second misconception is that data is infallible. For some reason, people feel that data is always accurate and infallible. And even more, and this is where I get a little concerned, people feel that data is pure and devoid of biases, especially when we hear about all these algorithmic biases, the confirmation biases, sampling biases, the selection biases, to name a few. So, Asanka, what are your takes about this, where people think that data is infallible?
Yeah, I think it's a good point, and I would like to divide this into two: the accuracy of the data, and then accuracy of the insight and information coming out of the data as well. So the accuracy of the data will depending on the data sources, like where you are collecting this data, how you are collecting this data. So that we need to optimize and make sure that those things are correct. And the information accuracy and insight accuracy comes with various factors because data is context aware. And then data connected to many other attributes as well. So I'll give you an example. Like as an author, I would like to see how many people reading the articles that I write. Okay, so if I ask this question from a typical content marketer, they will give me a fact, okay, this number of reads. But most of the time, that number of reads coming from the number of people who open the article. But
right. It's the
that
number of
doesn't exactly.
right, the number of impressions, right? It's not about
Exactly.
the number of clicks, which becomes
Yes,
vanity metric.
exactly. Then like, how about we connect it to the context and then the other attributes? So as an example, we know exactly how many minutes will it take to read the entire document. Then we can identify how much time they spent. And then again, what about the heat map? And then see how they navigate through the document. So that's how we can convert that data into accurate insight. So to do that, I think the first part, the collecting the data, as well as how you kind of convert it with this context-aware and attribute-oriented information, the domain expertise come and play a role here. So that's where I think the domain-oriented data designs as well as domain-oriented ownerships are really important, because person who's consuming this data, they might not have a clue, and then that will lead to various business decisions that might not go in the positive way.
That's great. Exactly. So again, I want to reiterate, and this is like a pet peeve of mine as well, because you and I both, and I'm sure Sunil, you have the same thing as well, where we need to go in and keep continuing to emphasize and underscore the fact that data can be flawed or incomplete, and biases can be introduced during collection or analysis. An organization needs to ensure that the data is of high quality, it has much more accuracy. The context of the situation in which the data occurs or exists needs to be understood. And we need to have those robust processes in place to identify and mitigate any of these biases.
Yeah. So I'll just add one point, Asanka, and that was a great point. So data ultimately, you can have one aspect of data, but just one aspect about data may not lead into information. This is where bringing some of these aspects together, stitched together to draw the information. And what is important, let's say for data-driven culture or data-driven decision-making here is the completeness and the speed and the fidelity of the data, rather than a few years back, which was the focus was more on the single source of truth and compliance. But it's not compliance, it is more about intelligence now.
Yeah, agreed. And I know we have a great stair-step ladder or a connectivity where you have data as an atomic component that goes into information, that goes into knowledge, into wisdom, and then finally you have experiences that come out of it. So again, there are so many ways that we can address this, but it is still interesting that that comes up as a misconception. The third misconception is that data analysis or any work upon data is solely for technical experts. Some organizations believe that data analysis is only for the data scientists and the people who are handling the data, and that it's too complex for others to understand. And Sunil, I know you've led many teams in this space. I want to get your thoughts on this and how you have addressed this misconception.
Yeah, that's a great question, Gautam, once again. And while Sanka was explaining, he used a word which is very, very important, is context. So the business context and how you're looking at the data in what context is very, very critical, especially the domain area, the functional area. So while people or the organizations, this is one of the mistakes which I think they are making, or the decision they are making, that if you have data scientists, you have data engineers, they're going to solve the problem for you. However, what they're missing is who's defining the problem. They are the business people who are defining the people who must define the problem. So your data scientist and your data engineer, they don't understand the functional, the domain part of it. If they don't understand it, they cannot tell you what data they need to solve a problem. So saying that this analysis is only limited to the technical experts, I think this is very far from the truth. It is a combination. We have to have these teams working together, where business and operational people are defining what the problem they want to solve, and they can explain that the data in the context, in the functional area, in that particular domain, yeah, this is the data we have, this is what the data is actually doing. Based on that knowledge, then the data scientists and data engineers, they can create, whether to call it a knowledge graph or hypothesis, and see if it can answer the questions which business is asking for or asking us to solve that problem. So it's not true that the data analysis is only for the technical experts. It's a teamwork, it's a mix together. We may be looking at different aspects of the data. For example, the business people, operation people looking at the functionality, the feature data, the product part of the data. The technical experts like data scientists, they are trying to answer the question which business asking, can this data answer that question through modeling or through different hypotheses?
I appreciate that. Thank you. And I'm really happy that you mentioned all of this, because I also firmly believe that a data-driven culture should involve everyone within the organization, starting from the senior executives to the frontline employees. The senior executives, they have to start off with explaining the why, the purpose. They need to tell why this particular data is being collected, what out drive towards. Because if they don't explain the why properly, you are going to have a lot of challenges in selecting the data or processing upon the data. So you have things like selection bias or sampling bias coming in. You probably even have algorithmic bias, because the people are going to make inferences of what the executive expected. And then the executives themselves might have confirmation bias, because they've already assumed certain things and they're going to start picking and choosing the kind of data that will support. And that's where you get all these cherry picking issues and all this. And so thank you. It's a true problem that a lot of organizations face. And it's really important to train and educate employees on how to use the data to inform their decisions and make data-driven insights accessible to all the stakeholders. So let's shift gears a little bit. And Sunil, this question is for you. I would like you to share your experience on having transformed organizations here, right? So the question is, how do you incorporate data-driven strategies into modern architectures?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think we may have to have a separate dedicated session on that, but I'll try to touch upon few important aspects of it. So if you look at the modern platforms or architecture, what I call is the multi-facet or multi-dimensional platforms these days. So one of the things which we look at is, and which is very important, is the speed, scale, and precision. See, speed means how fast we can build and stand up our architecture or the solution. And is it scalable? Means today we are performing, let's say, few use cases, can it take care of hundreds of use cases in the future? And precision is the accuracy, how accurate it is. So it's very important that we keep those things in mind while we are looking at the building. If you're building the ground up, it's a great opportunity. So if you're looking at, let's say, modern technologies, you're looking at the data management aspect of it, you're looking at relational databases, you're looking at NoSQL databases. There is an issue with both of them. There's a challenge. The relational database talks about having the relations, but it doesn't do that great a job which is required today. In NoSQL, there's no relationship. So how we tackle those issues, then you might want to bring something called a graph database into the picture. And just to let you know, by 2025, 80% of these analysis, the modeling and everything, the graph database is going to be a key part of this modern architecture. So having said that, now we have so many things available. The compute is available. So many machine learning tools are available. So I think there's an opportunity to get this foundation architecture right in place. So for example, if we go some time back, the database management was more of a afterthought. First, you look at application architecture, look application and the enterprise architecture, but we were not really focusing on the database architecture assets from a AI, ML, machine learning aspect. But now it's an opportunity. We have to keep all those things in mind. And also think about, to begin with, depending on the size of the organization, are you going to first focus on your defensive data strategy or offensive data strategy? So that will also play a very, very important role into your modern architecture.
Yeah, I think I would like to add few to that as well, based on some of these experiences that I had when defining the data strategies. So basically, one thing we need to understand the application architecture and the information architecture. Those are two different things, and unfortunately, most of the application architects and developers, they are not aware of how you can have a proper data modeling and then manage the information architecture side. So that's where we need to provide a clear way of accessing this data, as well as have a data strategy within the information architecture and provide it for the application architects for them to consume these things. So sometime back, I introduced this concept called cell-based architecture. Again, one intention I had there also, how we can simplify this as well as map data into domain-driven design, and then provide it in a way that application architects can easily consume the data and build applications. So that's another trend that we see when it comes to these distributed modern microservice-based architecture styles.
Yeah, those are some amazing great points, and it's exciting, right? How we are starting to connect all the dots out here, so to speak. We're bringing in the role of cloud computing, AI, ML. We're bringing in automation and enabling these data-driven cultures, and we're also emphasizing not just the fact that having microservices and APIs are going to help, but bringing in a data mesh, bringing in all these data constructs, data modeling to help democratize this data access across all of the organizations. And we've not even touched a little bit upon the security or the provenance of data all over. So that in itself, we can go into so much depth, but I want to keep it at a little more higher level in this particular thing in the interest of time. And I'd like to move on to the next topic, which is something that Asanka, you and I have talked about. We've been very passionate about this, right? We have written about the best practices. We've talked about fostering culture and so on. So I want you to present, or at least start talking about some of the best practices in fostering a data-driven culture. Do you want to share your 4E strategy again and provide a brief overview of the best practices that we have recommended in the past?
Yeah, I think you kind of touch based on something very important when it comes to the culture, the why part, because at the macro level, I think a positive culture creates when people understand the why. So I think we have to start from there, not only to data, but as the overall objectives and then value streams, we need to understand that. So that is the first level. Then as technical leaders and people like a group of people who we enable others to get into that culture, that's where the 4Es are coming. So how we can empower, how we can engage people, how we can entrust, and how we can enable them. So you kind of touch based on all these points earlier as well. So if you go in detail and map it to the data-driven culture, basically empowerment comes with that people who owns the data and people who consume the data. That's one side. And the engaging, basically, whenever that we do these exercises of designing data structures and then data APIs, how we can socialize it across the organization and get more and more feedback and start providing meaningful data sets for the organization to consume. And entrust is coming with, okay, we need to get their feedback, and that's where the domain expertise are coming, and we need to try to address the feedback coming from everybody. And enable basically comes with how we can expose this data set to the relevant groups with correct governance and security guardrails. Put it there, but enable these data sets as much as possible. So I think the APIs are a great way of doing that. Not only creating APIs, have a marketplace of APIs that they can discover and then find these data points that they can consume. So I think that's how we can look at the 4Es and the data strategy and the cultural aspect.
Yeah, thank you for that. Sunil, do you want to add anything else? I know Asanka and I, we've talked a lot about it, but I'd like to get your thoughts about this 4E approach and the way in which we can drive towards fostering a better data-driven culture.
Yeah, Asanka touched upon a few key points, starting from the education to enabling to empowering to eliminating the blockers. So I just want to draw your attention to 2 points. One is which Asanka also touched about, the data literacy. So data literacy is how you incorporate data into your day-to-day jobs, especially for the associates and the technical people and non-technical people, how they are using the data to do their day-to-day work and jobs. So that's your data literacy. Second is, I think, which is more critical, is your data mindset. Data mindset is that when you are educated enough, you have a good understanding of the data in the organization and how you apply or use the data to create new products or solve problems. So that's your data mindset. And sometimes I also combine it with the culture of experimentation. Means you got to be constantly experimenting with new use cases, the new data sets, because data is changing all the time. Problems are changing, business context is changing. So it's very, very important that we also incorporate the culture of experimentation to really encourage this data-driven culture.
It's awesome. Awesome. Great insights from you both, as always. But in the interest of time, let's wrap up. Let me summarize this discussion. So a data-driven culture is essential for modern organizations because it helps them make better decisions, improve the customer experience, increase agility, foster innovation, and achieve stronger performance. We talked about 3 common misconceptions that occur when implementing a data-driven culture. The first one being that thinking data is the only factor to consider and limiting oneself to only data and ignoring other factors such as business strategy, customer feedback, employee input, intuition, and plain old human judgment. The second one is the second misconception is that data is always accurate, pure, and infallible. And time and again, we've seen that biases creep in, ranging from algorithmic bias to confirmation bias to sampling or selection bias. And the third misconception is that data analysis is only for technical experts. And Sunil talked about why a data-driven culture should include everyone in the organization, all the way from senior executives to frontline employees. And Sunil also talked about incorporating data-driven strategies into modern architectures. We then dug in a little bit deeper on how we can do that and explored some of the best practices in fostering a data-driven culture. Thanks, Asanka, for reintroducing the 4E strategy, which is educate everyone, eliminate the brokers, enable frontline folks, and engage with the people. And then Sunil added some great points on data literacy, data mindset, and also included an additional E, which is experimentation, one of my favorite words, things that I am extremely passionate about. So thank you both for another lively episode of Spirited Dialogue. As always, some great insights from both of you, and our listeners will really benefit from your expertise and experiences. So until next time, from all of us here at Transformity, cheers.